Hello dear students, a quick recap of our previous seminar. So there were four main topics: logic functions, text operations, indirect referencing, and index lookup functions. So let's start with logic functions. Let's assume that we have two variables a and b, and they can have two values 0 or 1. In case of these discrete logic functions, 0 is equal to false, or in Russian false, and 1 is equal to true, or true in Russian. And this 0 will be equal to this text and 1 will be equal to this, and it's some kind of exception. Usually you can transform 0 to text, well, numbers to text and text to numbers in this way. And well, these logic functions came from electronics, so we can say that 1 is the presence of some kind of signal and 0 is the absence of this signal. And there are three main functions which are used to build all of these possible operations with signals. They are AND, OR, and NOT. And OR work with two or more variables. NOT can work with just one variable. So how they work in Excel? You just provide two variables, and depending on the values which they have, you will get either false or true. In case of OR function, the syntax is quite the same, but the result is different. And for last function NOT, you can well, provide just one variable, and it just changes to an opposite one. And these functions are important in case if you need to add some logic in your algorithms, in your well, decision making process, and they can be combined with other functions. Some kind of close to well, decision making process, there is another function of if of some conditions, or in Russian it will be if too, and another similar formula, but it's some kind of error tracing, is if error, or if error in Russia. Well, okay, this if function works with three arguments. The first one is the condition which should be checked. The second one is the true branch of this function, and the last one is the false branch of the function. So let's assume that we have a set of numbers here, and we can provide some kind of conditional checking with a formula. So let's assume that if we have value greater than 2, then we'll return 1, and if we have value less than 2, it will return 0. So we check the value, if it's more than 2 or not. So it will look something like this. First argument condition, next one true branch, and the last one false branch. And as expected, we have two zeros and three ones with application of this formula. And let's assume that we have some additional values in a separate column. Let it be A, B, 3, 4, 5. And here we have a multiplication of this variable with this variable. And you can see that if you try to multiply a letter or a text by a number, you get this error. And in some cases you may need to hide these errors, or for example change these values to zeros or to other text. So you can use if error function in this case. If error, when you have a value, you can either provide this value, or even more preferable way is to provide the multiplication again, and the value in case of error, it can be 0, for example. So in this case we can see that for these two values there was an error, and the value was changed to 0, and in these cases where calculations were possible, everything is just fine. Or we can use this function even in this syntax. For example, let's assume that we again are assessing the multiplication, and well, let's type something is wrong. So for first two values there is indeed something wrong, because we try to multiply a number by a letter, but in the letter third ones everything is just fine. Well, sometimes this if error function can be very useful in your work. Well, okay, let's move on to working with text. So first tab will be logic, and next tab will be text. There are only 4 main functions which are associated with working with text. They are these ones. Okay, let's check the syntax. Oh yes, it's okay. Let's think. Then we have next one, and in English it's these ones. Actually, in English equivalent of these formulas is more logical than Russian counterparts. So let's use one of the oldest mem of Killray was here as a text, and then we can apply these different functions. So in case of left function, we provide the text we are working with, and then the amount of characters or elements we want to get from this text. Let it be 5 elements. So it just gets the first 5 letters of our sentence. The same situation with right function. Again, we provide the text, and then we provide the amount of elements. Let it be the same value, so it's a space and 4 letters. Then we can calculate the amount of characters in our text, and there are 15 characters, and then we can find position of a certain value in our text. So it will be something like this. Let's assume that we are going to find W value, and we are trying to find it here. So the value of letter W is on the 8th position within this sentence. And if we combine this function, we can proceed with some transformation of this original sentence. So, for example, we may splitting it into separate letters. Let's assume that we have 15 values, as far as we have a sentence with a length of 15 elements, and then we can proceed with splitting in two steps. The first one, we can just obtain the left part of this sentence. So the sentence is this, and we may change the reference to an absolute 1 when we select the number of elements, and so we have these 15 values. And with the next step, we just get the rightest letter or character from each of these phrases which we get on the previous step. So our initial sentence is transformed in a list of letters. If we combine these functions, it will be something like this. So the first stage, we just get required amount of letters from the original text. And then we wrap with this function with a write function, and we need to get just one letter from it. So this nested variant of two functions is equal to application of two functions sequentially. If you need to debug the function, you can apply this approach. You can select the values which you want to calculate, then you can just select F9, and it will provide you the value obtained at the first step of calculation, when I can just press escape in order to keep the original formula as it was. So actually some text operations are not very convenient in the Excel, so if you need, for example, split a text in a few parts, sometimes the most appropriate approach is just to select the column which has these values which should be splitted, and then add this button of splitting text by words. So just press it, select the format with delimiters, check the space delimiter, and then just click finish. And the original sentence is split in three parts with a separate word in each column. Okay, well, the next thing, we can combine some calculations with text. Let's assume that we are assessing some dynamics of a certain parameter. It changed from the first month in the second month, and we can divide one value by another one to get the change. And then we can add some meaningful comments to these calculations. So we can write something like this: the value increased by, and then we can provide our calculation. So we use this ampersand sign and add a link. Well, we get this text, the value increased by value, but actually the value calculation is not correct one, so we can adjust it. The increase was by 13%. So next step we can adjust the value to percent value and add percent sign to make it obvious that we are working with percents. We don't need so much digits after the dot, so we can apply a round function. We need to be sure that the amount of parentheses is just as we need it to be. I think that 2 digits after the point is just enough for this task. And here we go. We have 13% and 2 numbers, 2 digits after the dot. And we can have the opposite situation when the value decreased. And let's build the similar comment for this option. So the value decreased by, and we need to divide this value by this value, and then we need 1 minus this calculated value. Then again we just need to multiply it by 100 and to add percent sign. Let's check that everything works as expected. Yes, it works, but again we have this huge amount of digits after the dot. So let's adjust some rounding. Can we add additional parentheses? When we select the required amount of digits, and that's all. So now the calculation works fine, and we can combine if function with this comments generation. Let's assume that we once again have a set of 2 values, and then we can copy the formula from here, and we can start with building a function of if. So if this value is greater than this one, then we write that there is an increase. Well, okay, one additional step which I missed. We need this calculation. So let's once again copy the formula. Let's copy it, and then if the condition is that its value is greater than 1, then we insert our formula, then we just change the value we are working with, and then we'll provide an additional, the last argument for false branch. So the final formula is quite complicated one with a lot of symbols, but actually it can be split in 3 parts. First one, condition. Next one, the comment in case of increase, and the last one, the comment in case of decrease of a value. And if we change it, for example, from 15 to 18 in order to get a decrease, you can see that the comment was updated automatically. And this approach can be rather powerful, especially if it's combined with some infographics. So we can add a chart to our worksheet, then we can select the data we are going to work with. We can remove this one and add a new one. It's not necessary for us to have any title for the values. We can change the legend, the values for axis, so it will be month 1 and month 2. And actually it's almost the same. The main problem with this chart is that it does not start from 0. We need to fix it. We can click Ctrl 1 like this. Select axis, Ctrl 1, and here we get the formatting, and then we just change that the minimum value starts from 0. And now everything's okay. At least this chart is acceptable. Then we can click on the title of the chart, go to the formula field, click equal, and then click to our comment which is built with if function. So the title of the chart is automatically updated by this value. And we don't need to change it manually, so it's something can save a lot of time when you can link the title of the chart to a certain value in your workbook. Okay. For the next part, which is related to indirect referencing, let's assume that we have 3 lists with almost the same format. The first one can be named as 1, the next one as 2, and the last one as 3. And to make them separate, let's change the tab color to tangerine or to orange. Let's assume that we have the same data, sales, some value, costs, another value, and well, profit, which is calculated as a difference between sales and costs. And in each tab we have it on the same at the same place. But let's assume that the sales value is another one, the costs have another value too, and here it's the same. Okay. And we have some report which provides some summary of values from Q1, so the months ranging from 1 to 3, and we need some kind of a table with these three values, with sales, costs, and profit levels. And the most simple approach which we can apply is just to press equal, then click on the first tab, click on the sales, and we'll get the sales from the first tab. The same approach for sales for the second tab and for the third one too. Then we can just click costs for all of these tabs, and the last one, the profit. Actually, we can calculate profit value by a formula, but let's assume that we need to click it. And you can see that for three different parameters, for three different months, we needed to click 9 times. And it's very simple to make a mistake somewhere. So this approach is something like direct referencing. But we can have an alternate approach with indirect referencing. And we can see that the references are quite similar for all of these tabs. They start with, well, not for this one. One moment. Well, and actually there is a mistake here. Because I need to change it to here. Okay, now it should be fine. Well, the reference from here. And the last one. One difference in the cell address is the link to the tab. And we can, well, each cell has an address which contains three parts. First is tab, or well, sheet. Next one is column, and the last one is row. So in this case the tab is, okay, here. The tab is 1, the column is C, and the row is 1. And here we can see that the only thing which is different is the tab reference. Please pay attention that the tab reference is divided by the exclamation sign from the column reference. And so there can be an approach when we provide these three parts of a cell address in order to get this address. Let's assume that we need to have cells for all of these cells once again. It will be something like this. We'll need to apply an indirect function. We can build our cell address from these three parts. First part is a tab link, when we need to add exclamation sign in order to separate it, when we add column link, and the last thing we add row link. So we can get this sales value of 1000. And the same thing is for other two tabs. You can see that these values are the same as these values. We can perform the same calculation with costs. In this case, we'll need just to change the row index from 1 to 2, and you can see that these values as previously are the same as the values provided here. And we can reference the values even this way. We can just press type 1, then add exclamation sign, and then for example C1, C2. Well, we need to add the quotation, end the quotation, so you can see that once again we get this this value of costs. And this approach with indirect referencing can be very useful if you have a lot of tabs with different values, for example not ranging from 1 to 3, but for example ranging from 1 to 50. And it can save you a lot of time if you are working with some data summarizing. Okay, let's move to the last part of the seminar related to indexing. Let's assume that we have a table with some randomly generated values. The values are ranging from 10 to, let it be, 100. So it will have 5 columns and a few rows, well, 8 rows. Then we can just copy them and paste as values in order to keep these certain random values which we generated. And here we have column indexing and row indexing. And that's our table. So each cell within this table has its own address. So for example this cell has a row index 6 and column index 4. This one has row 3 and column 2, and so on. And one of very powerful formula which helps you to work with tables and indexing of it is called index. Well, let's type it here. Or in Russian it's index 2. How this formula can be applied? So we have index. When we provide the table we are working with, we can change its reference into absolute values. When we have index of the row, let it be row 3, and a column, let it be row or column 5. And our formula will return to us the value of 20. So third row, column 5, here it is, and indeed it's 20. Then we can provide row and column index in a bit different way. For example, we can have row input here and column input here. And then we can change our formula. So we change 3 to reference to the row index and 5 to the reference of a column index. And row 4 column 5 will be value of 72, this one. Okay, another function which is closely related to this index one is the function of match, or it have a bit strange title in Russian. The match function returns the index of a certain value within a row or a column. So, in case of columns, there are 5 elements and they range from 1 to 5. And if we apply a match function to it, we can provide number 3, the range is this one, and we have an exact value, so the last argument is 0. And it's quite obvious that the number 3 is the third element of this range. Let's make it a bit more complicated. For example, the first value we have is, let it be week 4, then we have week 5, week 6, week 7, and week 8. And in this case, application of this match function is, well, the use of its application is more obvious, because we can use it in the following way. For example, we need to find the value of week 6. So we can use this function again. The value we need to find is week 6. The range where we are going to find it is this range, and once again we need to get the exact value. So once again, week 6 is the third element of the range. And for example, week 8 will be the fifth one. So it's not necessary for you to get to work with sequent elements. You can just find it by some, well, name in the rows or in columns. And here, for example, we can have some distribution centers. Let it be DC. Let them to start from the third one. DC is from 3rd to 10th. And once again we can example find the index of this DC by a certain element name. let's once again use the function of match. We need to find this value. We are going to find it here, and we need an exact value. So DC7 is the fifth element of this range. If we start to count from DC3, DC7 is the fifth element. It's quite obvious. And let's assume that we need to find the, well, let it be costs value in our table, which refers to DC7 and to week 8. So would be the value of 75. And we can get it by using an index function with the arguments provided by match function. So it would be something like this. Index, when we get the table, the range, and for the first argument we get the, well, row index, and the last one the column index, and it returns to us the value of 75. So we can once again split it in three parts, in three steps. First step is to get the index of the well, column value with the help of match function. The next step is to get the index of row value by match function again, and the last is to use index function in order to get the intersection of this row and column to obtain this value of 75. If we split it in three parts, everything is quite simple, but if we combine it within one formula, it's quite a big formula. So once again we get the index of a table. Then we use a match function in order to find certain row, and the last argument match function, which is used to find a column. Well, it was not a very good idea. Once again, index, the table, match for row, match for column, and we get the same value of 75, but our formula is rather big in this case. Sometimes a simpler approach can be used with the help of the lookup function, which has this name in Russian. It has simpler syntax, but it doesn't have the same capabilities of combining of index and match. The lookup formula works the following way. Let's start something from here. Once again, you have a certain value which you need to find. Let it be the DC7. And when you have a table where you need to find it, the difference compared to the previous approach, you need to start your table with the column which contains which starts with a column which should contain the value you're going to find. So our DCs are in column C, so we start our table from the column of C. And then let's assume that we know which exact column we need to find. So in this case, let it be week 8, which is the 7th column in this table. If we start from C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and I will be the 7th one. So we provide that it's the 7th, and the last argument is the interval view. In majority of cases, maybe in 99.9%, you'll need to provide the 0 here, and that's all. It will again get you the value of 75. So you can see that this formula is rather short, but this one is rather long. But there is some feature and some limitation of application of this VLOOKUP formula. It always works from left to right. If you have, for example, DC names here, you can't find these values from right to left. But it's not the problem in the majority of cases. So if you can use the lookup function, you can use the lookup, but for cases which are more complicated, you can use the combination of index and match functions. That's all for the recap of the previous seminar. Goodbye.